The engine sputtered, a death rattle that echoed the hollow ache in my gut. I'd been nursing this old heap for months, coaxing it through city streets and across state lines, but out here, miles from anything resembling civilization, it finally gave up. The silence that followed the final gasp was absolute, thick and suffocating. My breath hitched. I was stranded. A quick glance at the fuel gauge confirmed what I already suspected. Empty, of course. It was always something, always the universe conspiring to keep me just out of reach of. Well, of anything, of tenure, of recognition, of a life that wasn't perpetually teetering on the brink of financial ruin. I slumped back against the worn leather of the driver's seat, the cracked vinyl cool against my sweat-dampened shirt. The sun had dipped below the horizon, bleeding the sky into bruised shades of purple and orange. My phone offered no solace, no signal, just a dead, black screen. I'd been so focused on the drive, on the promise of a new beginning, that I'd forgotten to check the basics. Always so caught up in the grand narrative, I missed the footnotes. The crucial, life-saving footnotes. My fingers, still smelling faintly of old paper and desperation, fumbled for the worn leather-bound journal in my lap, or more accurately, my perpetual albatross. Years of research, of chasing down obscure texts and interviewing the last few scattered descendants of forgotten communities, all leading to this. A dead car in the middle of nowhere with a deadline I was already missing. The inheritance. That was the hook, the unexpected deus ex machina that had pulled me out of my academic doldrums. Everything. Her estate. A manor. Isolated. Dilapidated. And according to the terse legal documents, situated on what was once known as the old grounds. The local lore, the bits I'd managed to unearth during my frantic research into the family tree, spoke of something more, something ancient, something that predated even the earliest settlers. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. My head snapped up, headlights. 2 pinpricks of light growing steadily larger, cutting through the deepening gloom. Relief, sharp and sudden, flooded me. A car. Someone was coming. I pushed open the car door, the hinges groaning in protest. The air, when it hit me, was damp and carried the faint, earthy scent of decay. It wasn't unpleasant, not exactly, but it was heavy, like the air in a cellar that hadn't been opened in decades. I stepped out, stretching my cramped limbs. The approaching vehicle slowed, its headlights now illuminating the broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. It was an old truck, its paint faded and peeling, but it looked sturdy. It pulled up beside me, its engine a low rumble that vibrated through the soles of my feet. A figure emerged from the driver's side, tall. He walked towards me, his footsteps slow and deliberate on the gravel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was it, rescue or something else. He stopped a few feet away. Still, I couldn't see his face. Trouble. His voice was a low growl, rough like stones grinding together. My car. It just died, I stammered, my voice sounding thin and reedy. Ran out of gas. A blatant lie. I knew I'd had at least half a tank, but the words were out before I could stop them. Why had I said that? The figure tilted his head, a subtle movement that nonetheless sent a shiver down my spine. Out here, not much call for gas stations. I know, My mind raced, trying to concoct a more plausible explanation. I was heading to the old Blackwood place. The figure took a step closer. I could feel the heat radiating from him, or perhaps it was just the effect of the headlights. Blackwood Manor, he said, the words a slow, deliberate pronouncement. He knew the name, of course he did. It was the only significant structure for miles. Been empty a long time. Yes, well, I'm Marcus Thorne. I extended a hand, a gesture of goodwill, of normalcy. He didn't take it. His gaze, I finally realized, was fixed not on me, but on something beyond me, something I couldn't see. Not ever. What did he mean by that? Who were they? My breath hitched. The voice from the radio. It had stopped hours ago, a sputtering death of static and feedback, leaving me in the thick, suffocating silence of the countryside. Now that voice echoed in my head, the words of the estate agent I'd spoken to on the phone. Be careful, Marcus, the locals. They have their ways. Ways of what? Of making cars break down in the middle of nowhere, it seemed. The engine had died with a final, pathetic cough, leaving me stranded on a dirt track swallowed by encroaching twilight. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, pressed in. Then the lights. 2 pinpricks at first, growing into a blinding glare that sliced through the gloom. They were too low to be headlights. Too deliberate. They bobbed and weaved, approaching my broken-down car. Middle of nowhere, lights approaching. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, gripped tight. The engine was dead. No signal, just me and this encroaching, unnatural illumination. The lights resolved into the beam of a single, powerful lantern held aloft by a figure obscured by shadow. A man, tall, gaunt, his face a network of deep-set lines that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. My car. It just stopped. He didn't offer help, he just looked. His eyes, deep-set and unnervingly still, seemed to bore into me. "This is a lonely road," he stated, as if delivering a prophecy, "especially at night." "I'm Marcus," I managed, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "I inherited the manor, Blackwood." A flicker of something recognition crossed his face, vanishing as quickly as it appeared. "Ah, the scholar." He turned, the lantern beam sweeping across the overgrown track ahead. "It's this way, not far." He started walking, his gait unnervingly steady. I hesitated, then fumbled for my keys, locking the car with a click that sounded impossibly loud. I grabbed my bag, the worn leather feeling strangely comforting, and followed the bobbing lantern. The path was barely discernible, choked with weeds and fallen branches. The trees pressed closer, their branches skeletal fingers reaching out. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sounded amplified, menacing. Finally, the trees thinned, revealing a silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. Blackwood Manor. It was less a house and more a monstrous ruin. Jagged gables clawed at the sky, windows gaped like empty sockets, and ivy, thick and suffocating, choked the stone walls. It sagged as if burdened by the weight of centuries. A profound sense of stillness emanated from it, a stillness that felt less like peace and more like a held breath. The man stopped at the rusted iron gates, which hung open at an impossible angle, groaning a mournful welcome. "Here you are," he said, his voice devoid of inflection. He didn't offer to escort me further. He simply stood, a sentinel of the night. "Thank you," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Do you know where I can find?" He cut me off with a subtle shake of his head. "Best to go inside." I watched him go, a prickle of unease crawling up my spine. He hadn't asked my name, he'd known it. The grounds were a tangled mess of overgrown gardens and skeletal trees. The air here was different, heavy and still, carrying a faint, cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. It was the smell of decay, but with something else, something floral yet wrong. The massive oak door loomed, scarred and weathered. It wasn't locked. My breath caught. It smelled of dust, damp stone, and that same unsettling, sweet decay. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on something brittle on the floor. I knelt, fumbling for my phone, its weak flashlight beam cutting a shaky swat through the gloom. The floor was covered in a thick layer of something. It looked like dried leaves, but they were unnaturally brittle, crumbling to dust under my touch. As the light moved, I saw it wasn't just leaves. Tiny, bleached fragments mixed in. Bone. My heart gave a sudden, violent lurch. But it wasn't the staircase that drew my eye. It was the walls. They weren't plastered or wallpapered. Dried mud, no, that wasn't right. It was too uniform, too deliberately placed. As I shone the light closer, I saw it. The mud was mixed with something else. Strands, hair, human hair. My stomach lurched again. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. This was no ordinary house. This was a tomb. I forced myself to breathe, to push down the rising panic. I was a historian. I dealt with the past. This was just old, very old. I moved further into the hall, my flashlight beam dancing over the strange architecture. A draft snaked through the hall, not from any visible opening, but from the very stone itself. I strained to hear, but it was just beyond the edge of perception, a murmur that seemed to promise secrets. Why was the house built like this? What were these alcoves for? And that smell? What was it really? The gravel crunched under my worn boots, each step a small explosion of sound in the oppressive quiet. The gate groaned, a rusted hinge protesting my intrusion. I pushed it open wider, the iron teeth of its lock scraping against the stone post. The driveway, barely more than a rutted track, stretched ahead, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. My headlamp beam, a weak, trembling cone, cut a swath through the gloom, illuminating gnarled branches that clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. The old caretaker, or whatever he was, had vanished. Just like that. One moment, a silhouette against the dying light, the next gone. He'd known my name. Marcus. How? He hadn't asked. He just said, "Best to go inside. The night is long." And then he dissolved into the dense woods that pressed in on all sides. Now, standing before the hulking shadow of the manor, that unease had blossomed into a suffocating dread. The house loomed, a jagged silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. Rain had begun to fall, a soft, persistent patter that slicked the leaves underfoot and carried the damp, earthy smell of decay. I'd driven for hours, following the faded directions scrawled on a yellowed piece of paper, only to find my own vehicle, a sputtering, unreliable heap, had finally given up the ghost a mile back. A broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching that had been my fleeting, desperate hope. But no lights had come. Only the silent, watching woods and this imposing, forgotten place. I fumbled with the massive oak door. It turned with a reluctant, grinding protest, the tumblers groaning as if in pain. The door swung inward on unseen hinges, revealing a cavernous hall plunged into Stygian blackness. The air inside was thick, stale, and heavy with the scent of dust and something else, something cloying and faintly metallic like old blood. Cobwebs draped from the high ceilings like macabre decorations. Furniture, shrouded in white sheets, stood like pale, hunched specters. I had to find something, anything, my inheritance, my obligation. I moved through the cavernous rooms, my light dancing over peeling wallpaper, water-stained plaster, and the ghostly outlines of where paintings once hung. The silence was profound, broken only by the sigh of the wind through unseen cracks and the steady drip of water somewhere deep within the house. In what must have been a study, a massive fireplace dominated one wall, choked with ash and debris. A heavy mahogany desk stood in the center of the room, its surface a landscape of dust. I ran my hand over it, my fingers leaving trails in the thick grime. Nothing, just empty drawers, their contents long since pilfered or decayed. Then my light caught a glint of metal beneath a loose floorboard near the fireplace. My heart gave a strange, lurching thump. Kneeling, I worked my fingers under the edge of the wood. It resisted, then gave way with a sharp crack. Beneath it, nestled in the damp earth, was a small, tarnished metal box. It was surprisingly heavy. The latch was stiff, but it yielded. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that crumbled at my touch, was a journal. Its leather cover was cracked and warped, the pages within brittle and yellowed. The handwriting was spidery, cramped, and hurried. I opened it carefully, the spine groaning in protest. The entries were dated, spanning decades, even centuries. It spoke of the land, of a hunger that dwelled beneath the stone, an ancient entity that demanded appeasement. It detailed rituals, sacrifices, not just of animals, of people. The old ones stir, they demand the bloom, the life, the blood. There were sketches, crude and disturbing, of symbols I didn't recognize. They appeared again and again, etched into the margins, scrawled over passages. They pulsed with a malevolent energy even on the page. The journal spoke of a cycle, a recurring need that the manor and the land it stood upon was built to serve, participation. My gaze fell on a later entry, the handwriting more frantic, almost illegible. It chooses, it waits, it calls to the blood of the house. I see it now. In the mist, it wears the faces of the departed. The metallic tang in the air seemed to sharpen. The weight of the box felt impossibly heavy in my lap. The old caretaker's words echoed in my mind. The night is long. He hadn't warned me about the house. He'd warned me about the night. And the night, it seemed, was just beginning. What was the harvest? And why did the journal's author seem to know my name just as the caretaker had? The wind howled again, a long, mournful sound that seeped through the thick stone walls of the manor. It wasn't just the wind. There was a low thrumming beneath it, a vibration that seemed to resonate in my teeth. The metallic tang in the air was stronger now, coppery and sharp like old blood. My headlamp, usually a steady beacon, sputtered, the beam wavering. I held my breath, straining my ears. The whisper, it had sounded like my name. I shook my head, trying to dislodge the thought. Fatigue, stress, the isolation. It was all playing tricks on me. I'd been poring over those brittle, yellow journals for days, the words blurring into meaningless symbols. The history of this place was a tangled mess of local legends and hushed confessions, all pointing to something ancient and hungry, something tied to the very soil beneath this decaying edifice. I stood, my knees cracking in the silence that followed the wind's gust. The floorboards groaned under my weight, a protest from the old house. I needed air. I walked to the tall, arched window of the study, the glass clouded with grime. Outside, the moon, a sliver of bone, cast a weak, spectral light. The grounds were a black, undulating mass of overgrown trees and tangled undergrowth. Nothing moved. Yet I felt watched. The hairs on my arms prickled, a primal alarm. I turned back to the desk, to the half-eaten sandwich and the scattered pages. My research had led me to a recurring symbol, a spiral etched into stone, found on fragmented carvings deep within the manor's forgotten cellars. The text spoke of a binding, a feeding, and a renewal. It was all so vague, so frustratingly incomplete. The entity, whatever it was waking, and it knew I was here. That's when I heard it. A distinct, rhythmic scraping. Not the wind, not the house settling. This was deliberate. It came from outside, from the direction of the long, winding drive that led away from the manor. A slow, dragging sound like a heavy branch being pulled across gravel. Each creak of the floorboards felt amplified, a betrayal of my presence. I hesitated. This was foolish. Whatever was out there, it was likely just an animal or perhaps a trick of the wind. But the metallic tang in the air, the subtle vibration, they weren't tricks. The scraping sound continued, closer now. I crept to the main entrance, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare Persian rug. The massive front door was bolted, the iron mechanism stiff with disuse. I fumbled with it, the metallic shriek of the bolt being drawn back echoing through the silent house. I pulled the door open, a sliver of the night air rushing in, carrying with it the damp scent of earth and decaying leaves. And then I saw it. It was still there. And in the space between the beams, a figure stood. It was difficult to make out details in the gloom. A silhouette, tall, immobile, the scraping sound had stopped. I could feel a pressure building in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. This was it. The first direct encounter. The entity, or whatever served it, was acknowledging me. The figure didn't move. The metallic smell was overpowering now, sharp and acrid. I felt a tremor run through the soles of my worn boots, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to emanate from the very ground. The headlights of my car pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat like a giant, artificial heart. Was it waiting for me to approach, or was it simply observing? My gaze was fixed on the motionless silhouette. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the impossible. My car, the palpable wrongness of the scene. I took a hesitant step forward, then another. The gravel crunched under my feet. The figure remained. It didn't wave, it didn't beckon, it simply was. I could feel my own breath misting in front of me. It was a sound that spoke of age, of patience, and of an insatiable appetite. I stopped, rooted to the spot. The entity was real, it was here, and it had revealed itself in its own terrifying way. But what did it want? Was this a test? A warning? Or was this the beginning of the end? The first act of a ritual I was now unwillingly a part of. The headlights of my car flickered again, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw a reflection in them, something that wasn't human. The vibration intensified. It wasn't just in my teeth anymore. It was in the floorboards, a deep, guttural pulse that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath the manor. The coppery smell was a cloying perfume now, thick enough to taste. I backed away from the study door, my hand fumbling for the heavy brass candlestick on the mantelpiece. It felt cold, solid, a poor substitute for a weapon. The thrumming grew louder, a discordant chorus of low hums and scraping sounds. It was coming from below, from the cellar perhaps, or deeper still. My research had been a feverish scramble. Hours spent poring over brittle manuscripts, deciphering faded ink on parchment that crumbled at a touch. I'd found fragments, whispers of a pact, a binding. The land demanded tribute. It always had. The rituals were vague, maddeningly incomplete, but the pattern was there. A cycle tied to the moon, to the turning of the seasons, and a hunger, always a hunger. I had to understand. I had to find a way to break this. The entity, whatever it was, didn't want me to break me. I gripped the candlestick tighter, its weight a small comfort. The thrumming reached a crescendo, a shudder that ran through the entire house. Dust rained from the ceiling. A framed portrait of a stern-faced ancestor I didn't recognize crashed to the floor, the glass shattering into 1,000 sharp shards. I flinched, my breath catching. The air grew heavy, suffocating. The metallic tang sharpened, so potent it made my eyes water. I had to get out, but where? The storm outside raged, a relentless assault of wind and rain. My car, a sputtering mess of wires and rust, was miles back down the treacherous, unpaved track. A broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. That had been my only hope of reaching the nearest town for supplies, for a moment's respite. Now it felt like a distant dream. I stumbled back into the hallway, the floorboards groaning under my frantic steps. The entity was growing stronger. I squeezed my eyes shut, focusing on the cold metal of the candlestick. Think, Marcus, think. The fragments spoke of offerings, of appeasement. But what kind of offering? The entity's hunger was insatiable, according to the scrawled annotations in the margins of one particularly disturbing tome. It fed on vitality, on essence. I forced myself to open my eyes. The hallway was the same, yet subtly wrong. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me, their painted eyes following my every move. The grandfather clock in the hall, its pendulum long since stilled, began to tick. A slow, deliberate thump, thump, thump. That echoed the pulse from below. I needed a plan, a tangible way out of this. I remembered a passage, something about a specific alignment, a moment when the veil between worlds thinned. Was that what this thrumming signified? Was it preparing for something? The ticking of the clock grew faster, more insistent. Thump, 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 thump. The sounds from below were changing too. The scraping was more distinct now, like fingernails on stone or something being dragged. It was locked, heavily barred from this side, or was it? I took a step, then another, my heart racing. I could see my breath misting in front of my face. The metallic smell was almost overpowering now, thick and nauseating. I reached the cellar door. My hand trembled as I reached for the heavy iron latch. The thrumming was directly behind it, a resonant hum that vibrated through the wood and into my fingertips. The ticking of the clock was a frantic drumbeat now, a countdown. What was waiting for me on the other side of that door? And was it the source of the ritual or merely a part of it? The pulse was a physical thing, vibrating up through the soles of my worn boots. It thrummed a rhythm that felt both ancient and impossibly alive, a heartbeat in the stone and soil. The coppery scent, sharp and metallic, filled my lungs, making my head swim. I stumbled back, my eyes fixed on the heavy oak door of the study. It was a barrier, yes, but also a promise. A promise of what lay beyond, what had been stirring since I'd arrived. My hand, slick with sweat, finally found the cold, smooth metal of the doorknob. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed to flee, to run until my lungs burned and this cursed house was a speck in my rearview mirror. But the folklore, the whispers in the dusty texts, they all pointed here. This room, this day. My breath hitched. The air grew heavy, pressing in on me. A low groan, like the earth itself sighing, echoed from within the study. It wasn't a sound made by wind or settling timbers. This was a sound of immense, slow suffering. The pulse quickened. A frantic drumbeat now, and the coppery tang intensified, so potent it made my eyes water. My fingers tightened around the knob, the metal biting into my palm. I could feel the tremor in my own body, a sympathetic vibration to whatever was happening on the other side of that door. I had to know. It clawed at the edges of my fear, demanding answers. What was this entity? What did it want? The text spoke of a price, a debt owed to the land, a balancing of scales. And today the balance was due. With a heave that felt like lifting a tombstone, I turned the knob. It was an absence of light, a consuming emptiness that seemed to drink the meager illumination from the hallway. The coppery smell was overwhelming here, thick and suffocating. And the pulse, oh, the pulse. It was a tidal wave now, shaking the very foundations of the manor, rattling the loose panes of glass in the distant windows. My gaze, drawn by an unseen force, swept across the space. In the center of the chamber, a rough-hewn stone altar stood, its surface stained a deep, unsettling crimson. And upon it, I choked back a cry. But I saw the shapes, the glint of something sharp, the unnatural stillness of a form that shouldn't be so still. It was the culmination of everything. Then a voice, not heard but felt, a low resonance that vibrated in my bones. It was ancient, weary, and utterly devoid of mercy. The dead is due. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't move. I could only stare, my mind a frantic scramble for an escape, a solution, anything but what was being presented. The folklore spoke of a loophole, a way to appease the entity without a final offering. A sacrifice of equal weight, perhaps. But what could I possibly offer that held such power? My life, my sanity. It moved with a fluid grace that belied its immense, terrifying presence. It coalesced, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape, its form shifting and reforming like smoke in a draft. 2 points of dim, malevolent light flickered where eyes should be, fixing on me. As was foretold, my hand instinctively went to the old hunting knife I kept in my boot, a ridiculous gesture against this thing. But it was all I had, a sliver of steel against an entity that commanded the earth. A distant, insistent beeping. My heart leaped. A car, it had to be. Someone was coming. Maybe they could help. Maybe they were the answer. I stumbled backward towards the study door, towards the faint possibility of escape. The ground beneath me trembled violently. The altar pulsed with a sickly, internal light. The voice, laced with impatience, hissed, "I cannot escape the reckoning." The beeping grew louder, closer. The sound of an engine, rough and sputtering, reached me. It was a beacon, a lifeline. I had to choose. The entity's hunger was palpable, a crushing weight in the air. The ritual demanded a sacrifice. Was I to be the offering, or could I find another way, a way to break this ancient cycle? The approaching lights offered a flicker of possibility, a chance to disrupt the inevitable. What would happen if I defied it? What further horrors would it unleash? The beeping intensified, a frantic pulse against the thick silence. My breath hitched. Headlights' twin predatory eyes stabbed through the gathering fog. An engine coughed, a ragged, dying sound that was nonetheless the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. A vehicle, here, on this cursed road. I scrambled from the shadows of the overgrown hedge, my legs stiff and aching. My throat felt raw, scraped from the desperate pleas I'd uttered moments before. The fog clung to me, damp and cloying, smelling of wet earth and something else. Something acrid like burnt sugar and decay. The approaching vehicle, a hulking silhouette against the bruised twilight, slowed. The engine died with a final, wheezing gasp. Silence descended again, heavier than before. A door creaked open. A figure emerged, silhouetted against the faint glow of a dome light. They moved with a strange, deliberate slowness, a marionette with frayed strings. Was this salvation or another trap? The figure approached, their footsteps muffled by the long grass. I could hear the rustle of fabric, a faint, rhythmic scrape that sent a shiver down my spine. I hadn't seen it since I'd made my choice. Marcus. The voice was low, gravelly, and utterly unfamiliar. It was a man's voice. Relief, sharp and unexpected, pierced through the knot of fear in my chest. "Yes, it's me." The figure stopped a few feet away. The mist swirled, obscuring them, then parted just enough for me to see. His face was weathered, etched with lines that spoke of hardship, but his eyes were calm, steady. He carried a heavy-duty flashlight, its beam cutting a clear path through the fog. "The old caretaker," he said, his voice even. "He sent me, said you might need a lift, said you'd made your decision." My decision. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. The caretaker, he'd seen, he'd understood, and he'd sent help. But what kind of help? And what did it mean to have made my decision? I looked past him towards the manor. The air felt lighter, less suffocating. Had it worked? Had the offering, the terrible, unthinkable offering, been enough? The thing, I stammered, my gaze fixed on the manor. Is it gone? The man followed my gaze. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he shone his flashlight beam around the immediate vicinity. The beam caught on something glinting in the tall grass near the broken-down car. Middle of nowhere, lights approaching. It was a small, intricately carved wooden bird, its wings spread in mid-flight. It hadn't been there before, I was certain of it. This place holds its memories, the man said, his voice quiet, and its appetites. They don't just disappear, Marcus, they change, they wait. He walked over to the wooden bird, his movements unhurried. He picked it up, turning it over in his calloused hands. This is a good sign, a sign of understanding, of a bargain struck. A bargain. I had struck a bargain, I had paid, but what was the price, truly? I felt a profound exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. The adrenaline that had fueled me for hours was draining away, leaving me vulnerable, exposed. I need to go, I said, my voice trembling. I can't stay here. The man nodded slowly. That's why I'm here, get in the car, it's not far to town. He gestured towards the broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching. This old thing decided to give up the ghost just as I was passing. Lucky for you, I suppose. Lucky, was I lucky? I looked at my hands. As I walked towards the broken-down car, middle of nowhere, lights approaching, I felt a subtle shift in the air. The fog seemed to thin, revealing the skeletal branches of the trees reaching like grasping fingers. The silence was no longer empty, but filled with a low hum, a vibration I felt more than heard. It was the sound of the land breathing. I looked back at the manor one last time. A single light flickered in an upper window, a warm, inviting glow that belied the horror I knew it contained. It was a trap, a gilded cage, and I had just stepped out. But had I truly escaped? Or had I merely been released, a lamb led from one pasture to another, the wolf still watching, its hunger merely sated for now? The wooden bird in the caretaker's hand seemed to mock me, its silent flight a testament to a freedom I wasn't sure I possessed. What had I truly unleashed or appeased? The headlights cut through the inky blackness like twin blades. I stumbled towards them, my legs protesting with every jerky movement. The gravel crunched under my worn boots, a sound that felt too loud, too real after the echoing silence of the manor. My hands, caked with earth and a sticky, dark residue I couldn't quite identify, trembled as I raised them, a pathetic semaphore in the vast emptiness. Was it luck? The thought flickered, a weak ember against the raging inferno of my fear. I looked down at my hands again, at the grime that clung to my fingernails, the raw patches where skin had been torn away. I hadn't felt the pain, not then. The vehicle, an old truck, by the sound of its idling engine, pulled to a stop. A door creaked open, and a figure emerged, silhouetted against the headlights. A man, just a man, a sound I hadn't truly heard in how long? Days, weeks. Time had become a slippery, unreliable thing within those walls. I opened my mouth to speak, but only a strangled gasp escaped. My throat felt raw, as if I'd swallowed sand. It's gone, I finally managed, the words raspy and foreign. He smelled faintly of damp earth and something metallic like old tools. He peered at me, his gaze sharp, searching. Gone? What's gone? He asked, his brow furrowed. I shook my head, unable to articulate the impossible. It was too much, too monstrous for the simple language of the outside world. The house, I replied, my voice gaining a desperate edge. It's not there anymore, it sank into the ground. He blinked, a slow, steady movement. He didn't laugh. He didn't call for help. He simply looked at me, his expression unreadable in the glare of his truck's lights. Sank, you say? I nodded, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my chest. And the ground, it's different, it's alive. He was quiet for a long moment. The wind, a mournful sigh, rustled through the unseen trees. I shivered, not just from the temperature. You've had a rough night, the man stated, his tone even. He gestured towards his truck. Get in. I'll take you to the nearest town, get you some help. Help? What help could there be for what I'd seen, what I'd felt? There was nothing there now but a featureless expanse. No gaping maw, no spectral silhouette, only the indifferent, breathing earth. I climbed into the passenger seat. The interior of the truck smelled of stale coffee and something faintly sweet like decaying fruit. He drove without asking questions, his grip tight on the steering wheel. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, the yellow lines a hypnotic, comforting rhythm. But even the mundane offered no true solace. We reached a small town before dawn. The man dropped me at a diner, the kind with fluorescent lights and the smell of frying bacon. He didn't ask for my name, and I didn't offer it. He simply nodded, a curt, almost imperceptible movement, and drove away, disappearing back into the vast, empty landscape. I sat in the diner, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like ash. The other patrons, a handful of early risers and night shift workers, paid me no mind. I was just another lost soul, a smudge on the periphery of their ordinary lives, but I wasn't ordinary anymore. The manor had scoured me clean, leaving only the raw, exposed nerve of my fear. The historian in me, the one who'd been so eager to uncover forgotten lore, was dead, replaced by something else. I looked at my hands again. The dirt had washed off, but the stains remained, etched into my memory, a phantom touch that prickled my skin. The cut on my palm, the one I hadn't felt, throbbed with a dull ache. It was a small wound, easily healed. But the deeper wounds, the ones inflicted on my mind, on my very soul, were a different matter entirely. I left the diner, the rising sun a pale, watery disk in the sky. The world seemed too bright, too loud. Every rustle of leaves, every distant siren, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Not the structure, perhaps, but the place, the heart of it, and it was waiting. My research, the dusty tomes and arcane symbols, had been a pale imitation of the truth. The folklore wasn't just stories, it was a warning, and I had walked headlong into its embrace. I had escaped, yes, but had I truly left? Or had a sliver of that ancient hunger, that insatiable need, attached itself to me, a silent passenger carried back into the world of the living? And the earth everywhere felt just a little too soft beneath my feet.